Hi, morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Trying to get my kids sorted for school, so I'm here, so I'm listening.
Great stuff. Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for coming in. I think we've got almost everybody, so I think we're going to get started. We're streaming, so I think we're good to go. So welcome everybody. Thanks so much again for making time. This is the second meeting of the Economic Recovery Team. As we've said before, what we're going to do, at least for now, is aim to meet every second Thursday at 9 o'clock, and we will go from there. So we've got a number of things on our agenda this morning. We want to bring some data, some survey data to the group just to get your feedback on. We have some initiatives that both the city and KEGCO have been working on, so we want to bring those to the group for feedback as well. And I'll say again what I said at our first meeting is that open, frank, honest feedback is exactly what we're looking for. So don't hesitate to tell us what's good, what needs to change, what we need to focus on, all those pieces. That's critical for us to be able to hear directly from you guys. So we're going to go walk through a few of the initiatives that are ongoing, get your feedback, but then I also want to make sure we allow time to hear from you. Updates, issues, concerns as well. I really want this to be a two-way feedback and discussion. And if there's issues that just kind of come up during the conversation on some of the other staff issues, that's great as well. But ultimately, the more that we can hear from you guys, the better and more focused our work will be. So good morning, Dan. Great to see you. I think we're up to 100% contingent. And like I said before, again, at our first meeting, we want this to be as free-flowing discussion as possible. So I'm going to just try to facilitate. So at any time, feel free to unmute yourself and jump into the conversation. But if you prefer, you just want to put your hand up, then I can certainly help to direct traffic if we need to do that as well. So with that, I think we'll move into our agenda. So the first thing that we wanted to do was just talk a little bit about the Kingston Business Impact Survey. Ian, I'm going to ask if you can maybe take a few minutes just to chat about that. Maybe for staff presentations, maybe we can aim for about just 5 minutes, just a summary, and then just be able to allow time for questions and discussion. That would be great. So Ian, if you want to take it away, that would be great.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I'll talk quickly so I can go through a few of the things here. So just as many of you are aware, we conducted a business performance survey in the beginning of April, just to try and get an understanding of what businesses we're facing and actually try and tease out some suggestions and get some ideas as to how we can create some efficiencies, develop some resiliency, and also look at what businesses are going to need as we look at reopening and coming through that. So just a bit of a preamble with respect to the survey. We created a suite of questions in partnership with the City of Kingston. And then we had MDB Insights do a consultation report for us. We were lucky to have over 200 businesses respond to the survey within the 3-week period. And we anticipate releasing the survey again with some minor tweaks over coming quarters, just to get an understanding of how the business ecosystem is changing. So I encourage everybody on this call or everybody watching to make sure that you watch for these surveys coming out, because I'd love to see the number of participants quadruple so we can get a better update on what's going on out there. And the full report is also available on our website. The link is right here, or feel free to reach out to me directly and I can send copies over as well. So we took the survey and we got responses based on all sectors and all types of businesses. But what we wanted to do was really tease out 2 specific sectors. One that would be hit hardest, and that would be arts, services, and hospitality. And then we also wanted to look at some of our supply chain focused sectors, such as manufacturing and construction. So I just took a snapshot of a couple of the key questions that I think this team can look at as an indication of where our business community is. So the first question is this one. If mandatory closures or reduced operations continue, is there a potential that you may have to permanently close your business? So as you can see here from the arts, services, and hospitality sector, 58.3% of the respondents said yes, that they would likely have to close their business, whereas 59.5% of the businesses in manufacturing and construction said that no, they would not. The next question that I wanted to send over to everybody for a quick snapshot, just on the variation of the sectors here, albeit some of this might be fairly predictable, but it's important to see these numbers. The next one was, have you or will you access any government support programs? And surprisingly, a large number of our business sectors are relying on supports at this time to help them through the 69.9% in arts, services, and hospitality, and 64.3% in manufacturing. I think that this is an important thing to look at as we forecast and look at our programming and planning for the future. We have to realize that these businesses are going to have to come off these supports at some point, and it's important for us to take stock in them as we create some programming. This was a very interesting one, and it is what support programs would be most beneficial to your business. And obviously from the arts, services, and hospitality sectors, you can see Shop Local campaign was resounding importance throughout them, as well as business continuity incentives, followed up by tax deferral. Whereas when you look at manufacturing and construction sectors, tax deferral ranked number one, and then naturally implementing local procurement policies is number two, and then again, business continuity services was number three. So I think that this is a good of how we can focus our energies, and if we focus on the top 3 or 4 of each of these, we're going to capture a lot of the supports that are required for our businesses locally. So this one really resonates with me. The question is, what do you feel will be the biggest challenges to reintegrate the community as we move to a local recovery period? And if you look, health and safety awareness is key. I think that based on my background in health and safety work, I think that having the general community understanding what's safe and what isn't safe is a big communication effort that's going to be responsible, that we're all responsible for. And then again, emphasis on reintegration within public spaces is paramount as well. And I know there's several teams working on this right now. And then the third one is timing. And we'll talk more about this in a couple of slides. So then the last question I wanted to put in here and show everybody was, if COVID-19 related precautions were lifted tomorrow, how long would it take for your business to operate at full capacity? The nice thing to see here is most businesses can be at full capacity within less than a week or within a month. And this comes back to the time and place. So as we look at programming and different initiatives, communication is key so that these businesses can prepare and get ready so that they can get at full capacity as soon as possible. And the last one I wanted to put on here was, do you feel, the question was, do you feel that we can better leverage our institutional partners to support positive growth for Kingston-based businesses? 68.5% of respondents said that yes, they felt that we could better leverage our partners. And then I put some unedited answers that were in here on the side, just to show you what some of the businesses we're talking about. One of them was obviously better local awareness of R&D capabilities to the business community, more emphasis on local procurement, as well as greater partnerships for the charitable and not-for-profit sectors. And then coming back to manufacturing and construction, training of skilled labor would be a great support function as well. The one thing that we wanted to ask businesses is if you could provide one insight from a business owner's perspective to prepare others for better business fortitude, what would they be? And these answers were unanimous regardless of sector. Obviously, diversifying supply chains, minimizing debt, investing in digital, creating contingency plans. There was a lot of comments on cash flow, which obviously isn't surprising. But it was nice to see business owners providing insights to other business owners on how they can be more resilient for the future. So I think the key takeaway from these, health and safety awareness and reintegration of public spaces is a top priority across all sectors. So we must ensure planning for reopening and encouraging our community to feel safe to be a part of Kingston life again. Another thing that was resonated throughout all responses was people prefer relief over loans. And naturally, more debt isn't going to save businesses in the 12 and 18-month period. And again, communication is key. This will allow for appropriate preparedness for businesses and the public, allow us to continue to work collaboratively. A lot of people said that they're noticing that Kingston community partners are working well together, and it's appreciated. So kudos to everybody that's doing that already. And the other thing, similar to this group that's on the call today, is making sure that there's continued engagement with private sector resources. So that's sort of a snapshot of some of the key items that I wanted this team to see came out of the survey. We do have the survey posted on our website, and also feel free to reach out to me. We did take some of the data and break it out into more sector specific criteria, and happy to share those results or any of the specific comments from businesses with the group as well, so you can see word of mouth what came out of it. So that's it for me. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Ian. Questions or comments from the group? Is there anything there that surprises you? Is there anything that you think is missing from the insights that we're taking from this survey? Dave.
Yeah, thanks for the report. Looks like a very thorough survey for business owners. I was just wondering if there's been any consideration on surveying the employees of those businesses. Sometimes employees have a different perspective when it comes to health and safety or things that may need to be put in place to make them feel comfortable in the workplace. So I was just wondering if there's any consideration on surveying employees across the region.
I think that's a great idea. And I think that when we roll out our next survey, which will probably be later this summer, I think that incorporating some of those questions and encouraging employees and employers to participate in the survey is going to give us a greater picture as to what's happening in the workforce. So I think that's a great idea, Dave.
I just wondered for your next survey if we could focus in on employment, because I think, and it's related to Dave's question, I think the employment issue is one of the core issues that we're trying to resolve in our economic recovery.
For sure. I think that's a great idea, Tricia. And what we can do is we can look at some of the employment surveys that have been conducted throughout the region already, see if there's any gaps in that, and make sure we pick up and fill in any of those gaps as we roll out the next survey. Great idea.
Great comments. Anything else? Any other insight that we think that that we're missing from that survey, or any other suggestions on as we're continuing to do these surveys? Anything else that we should be thinking of or including? Dan.
Tricia, you asked about what about employment, and I guess I'm not understanding. I'm not understanding what your question is.
In terms of employment, we're talking about the recovery of the city, and in terms of the impact of employment in terms of stages. In one of the graphs, they talked about 1 week, 1 month, 1 to 3 months, don't know, but to actually find out in terms of returning to the previous level of employment before COVID, how long is it going to, how long are these business owners and organizations predicting that they will be able to return to full employment? I think that's extremely important. And what are the factors that will be involved in returning to the previous level of full employment?
As it relates to the overall unemployment across the region?
Unemployment across the region and by sector.
Okay. Thank you.
Sean, did I see your hand? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. There was a brief question about participation in government programs and who is and who isn't, but to drill down into that a little bit more in terms of which programs are working.
So Tim, what I'll do is
which programs.
Sorry, Tim, you continue. I think what happened was
programs.
Go ahead.
Okay. Which programs would businesses like to see lengthened or extended, which would be most helpful for communities to lobby our levels of government to extend? And I think it would be really helpful to know which sectors think which programs should be extended and which would be more helpful for their continuity.
Perfect, Tim. I'll send you the survey. We did ask that question in the business survey to see which of the available programs were most utilized and any comments that people had with respect to those. So I'll send that over, and then I think that you have a great idea with adjusting for the next survey to see what sort of information people may need with those respective relief programs. So that's a great idea.
Thanks, Tim. That's a great point. And of course, I'll be looking to the group even today for some feedback as well, because advocacy is certainly ongoing from my end. So as much as we're incorporating into survey data, if we have some comments or feedback on, say, like the commercial rent relief program or other ones that are you know, whether what's going well, what isn't, that's useful for me to know so that I can get to work on that ASAP as well. Super. Excellent. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Okay, that's great. Thanks, and thanks, Ian, for taking us through that. That's great. Very, very useful information. So at this point, we're going to go to Craig, who's going to lead us in a discussion about the City Business Support Program, both what we've been looking at and some other options on the table. So, Craig, please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and good morning, everybody. We've prepared, city staff has prepared this discussion paper to provide some context to where efforts are being targeted, sector specific, identify objectives as part of these business support programs, and highlight for you some of the projects and activities that are currently underway, the projects that are in development, and then some that are in the planning stages. And it is extremely valuable to me and Kingston Act Dev and city staff that we get some input and sort of on the ground input on what's working and where the need is. As I've highlighted in the report, we are targeting, and it certainly builds on the comments I made at the first meeting with respect to where we're seeing the most impact. As we've noted in this short discussion paper, almost 30% of the workforce in Kingston in sort of the hardest hit sectors are being very severely affected. And that is certainly a focus of much of our efforts. As Ina has described in the business survey, we are taking guidance from the business community as to what they need and what they're looking for. Certainly in terms of support programs, tax deferral, as Ina suggested, is very highly identified. Business continuity incentive programs, the Shop Local campaign, and then local procurement preference policies was also highly identified. So these programs and these sort of program objectives have been identified and have been incorporated as part of the work that we're currently doing. In terms of objectives for the business support programs, certainly maintenance of a stable tax base is a critical element, not just for the municipality, the corporation of the City of Kingston, but more broadly for our community. To the point from several about employment, obviously maintaining employment levels in those most at-risk sectors is a critical priority. But beyond that is the revitalization and strengthening of commercial and industrial employment opportunities into the future. Certainly, we want to recover, but it's about positioning the community to be stronger moving forward and for further growth and prosperity. And then we have to take into a significant a number of changes, and certainly none more relevant to the format we're using today, working from home. For many of us, that's a new component to the reality. Certainly, automation. The discussion of automation has always been a specter for labor force discussions. It's certainly becoming back again in terms of touchless and where less human contact is required. So all these factors need to be explored in order to how do we maximize the benefit for our community. It is obviously very critical that we provide a safe and vibrant, consumer-friendly environment, but that also implies that it's a safe environment for workers as well. And how do we actually deliver on that. And finally, how do we encourage another private sector engagement in strengthening the economic base? So where are new opportunities? How do we take advantage of this situation to explore better coordination of the local supply chain by actually buying from each other, as opposed to buying from further afield? So how do we explore these opportunities? And I guess we've specifically referenced the private sector, but one of the key activities of my office right now, and working alongside the Kingston ECDev, is the sourcing of funds from other levels of government to help power these programs. In terms of activity to date, there are a number of programs that have been implemented, including waiving of penalties and interest on unpaid interim property taxes. That is a significant cost to the municipality, almost $200,000. Waiving of patio licenses and fees for all businesses. Again, a sizable cost. Creation of public spaces to support business expansion, animation of Market Square and other spaces, as an example. That is just getting underway. Very exciting to see that happening. Waiving of other fees for businesses that have temporarily closed, specifically sign fees. And support for business tenants of city-owned buildings. One of the regulations that perhaps was overlooked was that the municipality is not eligible for the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. So we're working with the tenants in our buildings to provide them with deferrals, so they can survive the closures. And lastly, and it has been discussed, the Buy Local Love Kingston campaign, which is seeing considerable success. Other options that we're actually exploring or that are in development include waiving of certain business license fees for restaurants, hair salons, etc. Potential tax deferral for various business classes, and I believe there's a subgroup that's been discussing this. The development of community improvement plans. Certainly, we've been exploring a specific downtown community improvement plan, but there's nothing to preclude the discussion of a community-wide or targeted geographic community improvement plans throughout the city that might be customized to explore specific needs of different areas in our community. A lot of activity is underway as part of my office with respect to workforce, and we've got a number of actually tools that are going to be launched within the next 6 weeks that we've been working on to sort of promote the rapid redeployment and reskilling of those that have been displaced as part of the pandemic. There will be a really good announcement, I think Monday, of some funding and a launch of a program to support some of the more vulnerable populations that have been hit with job loss and loss of opportunity as part of the impact of the pandemic. We're exploring opportunities to develop programs around financial support for workers to quickly reacquire in-demand skills. And these could be digital skills to sort of accelerate their return to employment, perhaps not in the same sector that they're in right now, but in a sector that is seeing strong employment growth. We're looking at a creation of a program to support new business creation, and that could be development of business plans to support the creation of new businesses across the community. And ultimately, we are incorporating the adoption of innovative technologies and new processes as part of the recovery. And that's actually, we did send out a briefing note later yesterday that I'll speak about next. We're also looking at cultural tourism development, tourism content development to support the tourism sector. I'll stop there and maybe throw it open. We greatly value the input from the members of the economic recovery team. I'm particularly interested because again, my office oversees the workforce development strategy implementation. Some excellent comments already about a survey of employees. We've actually got one in the works that we've designed. and happy to share perhaps at the next meeting, just to gauge, and that includes aspects of mental health impact, childcare impact, other issues that are affecting employees. Certainly good to see it mentioned here. So throw it open, Your Worship, to members for questions or comments.
That's great, Craig. Thank you. So again, I guess from the group, looking for feedback, reaction to what's already in the pipeline, what's missing, what needs to change, anything you can offer. Pavna.
This may have been covered and I might have missed it, and this may be a question for Ian rather than Craig, but do we know which sector has the largest impact on our economy? I've heard different things. I've heard tourism, I've heard construction, I've heard, just wondering if we have a clear sense of which sector is actually the most critical to the economy.
So maybe I can comment and Ian can comment based on the survey. Certainly from the econometric modeling we're doing based on the labor force survey and some output data, there's the impact to productivity and output, so sales and wages. That I think has seen one of the biggest impacts is actually in the retail sector. In terms of employment, I think the largest is, unfortunately, it's sort of very similar for retail, but also hospitality and the food services sector. Those would be the sort of the main ones in terms of just volume of size of dollars and number of people that are facing unemployment challenge.
But also, which sector actually has the most GDP, like whatever you call it locally? Which sector is the most responsible for economic success?
It's certainly there's. I don't have a list actually. I can prepare that for the next meeting or send that out in between the meetings of the exact contribution to GDP of each sector. Certainly, education and health in Kingston have a significant impact on GDP. I think construction is up there fairly high, but so are frankly retail and tourism and hospitality. So one of the things that's common about Kingston is that while it's often considered a government town, and that's not a knock, that's just because of the high amount of federal and provincial government employment. It does have a fairly rounded industrial base, so it does have manufacturing, it does have many aspects, but certainly education and health are heavy components of our economy. One of the I don't want to say downsides, but one of the factors is that it doesn't have a lot of private sector establishments. Those are the government expenditures, and it's obviously something that we're looking to explore and expand. How do we attract more firms in the health sector, private sector, to grow our base?
Right. So it means really we need to focus on the private sector. If it's already fragile, then
yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
So
Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to address kind of a cart and horse scenario in terms of the initiatives. If you look at those major sectors that you just mentioned, many of them depend on crowds, whether it's the arts, restaurants, hospitality, hotels, and tourism. And so then we get down to the key issue is health and safety balanced with the reintegration of public spaces. And so I think we have to actually address how we do that. And that is going to be the huge factor in leading to economic recovery. And so let's just make sure that when we're looking at those future initiatives, we've actually dealt with the key success factors before we launch a new initiative. Because
it's a very good comment.
Crowds determine the business model of Kingston's major sectors.
That's a good comment, and I think the one thing that I would throw out to the group that I've heard is not just reintegration of public spaces, but even some private spaces in new ways. So one of the things, of course, hearing from restaurants in the West End, it's not necessarily reimagining the public space; it's reimagining the parking lot or other private spaces.
Sorry, public and private spaces.
No, for sure. Absolutely. Actually, Susan, I'm wondering if you have any perspective there for, obviously, whether it's the CAT Center or just retail, just West End features. Is there anything that you see in this list that you think that is missing or that we need to rethink? Is there anything like from your perspective that be helpful, like just reimagining spaces or different things that might help on that health and safety piece?
Well, I think that's been a big part of the reopening of retail in our experience as a company. I'm part of a bigger company, and most of our shopping centers across the country have reopened, with the exception of 4 of us in Ontario. And we've had to utilize our parking spaces and so on for many different reasons than we have in the past. So I think it until we get the word from the government, the go forward position is really difficult to determine, because there will be limitations and expectations produced by the government that we'll have to adhere to, and then we'll have to reimagine how we do our business. And it's been interesting, and I'm sure we're all in the same boat, that we've done 14,000 different scenarios of how we're going to reopen and how we're going to get everybody back to work. But from the experience we've had with other shopping centers, it's a 3 to 4 week period before we're even at 70%. So it's going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to take some patience and some new thinking. As far as reimagining at this point, I don't really have a comment on that. I think we're just, we'll probably react to consumer demands and our retailers' demands at the time. But we do see things differently. We do see our parking lot differently. We see our common area space differently. We see our retail space differently. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but there's so many unanswered questions.
No, that's helpful, Susan. And even just your comment about how, you're connected with shopping centers in other provinces that have already reopened. If there's anything that you're seeing that's working well in other jurisdictions, if there's anything obviously that we can do to assist, if it's within the realm of your control, that's one thing. I know your comment about the province is well taken. I think just yesterday, the province has hinted that there might be stage 2 reopening on a regional level at some point next week, or at least more details on that. So like all of you, we're certainly watching that as carefully and as closely as we can, wanting to make sure we can hit the ground running whenever we have that green light, for sure. That's great. Abba.
Okay, I had a few points I just wanted to touch about. A few things. One, is there a timeline with respect to some of those programs that the city is rolling out? So say, for example, with the licensing, is this over a 2-year period that they will be looking at deferring? Like, because a lot of people have already paid for the year. So what does that look like for following years? Because given that we know that this is not a short-term solution, kind of what are the time frames associated with some of those things? So that's kind of my first question. The second one is, I think definitely just piggybacking on what Tricia said, I think really we do have to figure out that health and safety and that consumer confidence, and then having a plan. So for me as a business, I can't really look at other options because I'm not really sure what that looks like with respect to what is going to be put in place by the province, right? And so we're all in a holding pattern, not really being able to make informed decisions because we don't really know what those decisions will look like. And it's based on kind of the impact of that. And I think just clarity and pushing back and like a better plan and a broader vision so that we can have an idea. So it's not like a turnover from a Thursday to a Tuesday, that's what you have to do to kind of figure things out. And so I think that's kind of the challenge for us. And then just, the rationale behind things. Like, so for example, in the beauty sector or the personal sector, I've been receiving a lot of emails because the province announced suddenly, for example, that chiropractors, RMTs, and the legs could open, and Botox, for example. So we have people saying, how come people can go for Botox, but they can't come on a one-on-one for a pedicure? So just understanding, well, what is the distinction and what makes that particularly different from something similar that's a one-on-one thing where there are already health and safety standards in place. And then also the other comment is making sure that the messaging is such that it's not, daunting for both business and consumer. The fear is that, for a regulated personal beauty type place where we are already regulated, that we might get over-regulation and how that will hinder the productivity of what it is that we're trying to do, given that we'll be coming back from this slowly and trying to recover over that time. So I guess those are many questions kind of packed into there in one, and then just changing the messaging, because right now the messaging is saying, stay at home, this is what it is, but people are coming out. So then we have to start implementing what is the consistent messaging that we want people to follow, because right now, because there is none, people are doing a variety of things. And I think if we can just kind of establish some ground rules, then it will be easier for both the consumer and the business owner to kind of understand and to broach and to bridge and to give that confidence for people who are coming out. Those are my kind of.
That's great. Great comments and some questions. Craig, do you want to hit any of the city specific? I can make a couple comments on the provincial stuff, but.
Certainly, Your Worship, and very good comments. Certainly in terms of the timelines of and timeframes relative to fee waiving, that's something that staff is exploring right now. I don't have any hard information for you, but it is something we're looking to be more clear on. And certainly, I'm sure Mayor Patterson has other comments with regard to province, but I would say that the municipality is oftentimes in the same boat as the businesses in terms of changing regulation and policy. We don't get any advanced notice. we hear the announcements almost like the same time that you do, and have to react and develop on the fly. So certainly understand your frustration with respect to that, and I'm sure Mayor Patterson can comment further.
I think I would just add to that, Abba, that so I actually have a call with several provincial ministers tomorrow with some other mayors across the province, and that is one of the things that I will absolutely raise with them. We've heard this before, is that you can't make an announcement like one day and then expect that we can suddenly put that in motion the next day. There has to be a planning horizon, and so if we're going to reopen, can you at least give us some runway for the municipality, for businesses to be able to plan for that? So I hear you loud and clearly on that. I certainly would share that frustration, but ultimately anything we can do to kind of help on that, we'll definitely do that, for sure.
I just have one more point before we move on for Craig. Yep. I think in the business initiatives, it's really important that both the supply and demand side of the equation are looked at. And the demand side is actually going to be impacting the success of the supply side. So looking at both aspects is really, really important.
100%. That's exactly one of the biggest challenges we have.
And this, just with regards to property tax deferrals, this came up in our working group, and I know you can't legislate landlords. We can't make them participate in these deferrals through legislation, but if there can be any incentives for landlords to participate, because it doesn't really help the tenant if the landlord decides not to participate in the property tax deferral. And we've seen this with the rent relief program as well, that's been landlord driven, and many have chosen not to participate. So I don't know how it can be achieved, but if there's a way that the tenant can be somewhat tenant driven, it would be great. But I know there's challenges with legislating that.
That's a great comment, Tim. I see Lanny taking notes there, so we'll see what we can do on that for sure. Dave, I wanted to come to you. Did you have any comments on some of the workforce retraining, employment stuff? Any other comments or questions there?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's been any consideration on unique ways to put money back in the hands of the consumer. I'm obviously not an expert on this, but off the top of my head, just thinking about possibly increased wages for vulnerable sectors such as retail temporarily during the COVID-19 outbreak, and also paid sick days for smaller businesses. Workers need to be able to feel like when they are sick that they shouldn't come to work, and it's beneficial to the employer that when there is a healthy and safe workplace. I think that there needs needs to be some consideration on how to get money back in the hands of consumers so they in turn spend that money in our community.
Certainly your comment about consumer spending is being a critical component of our economy is absolutely true. I just saw some data out of the US on the drop in GDP, and it's a significant component is because people aren't spending. So people aren't spending, businesses don't have, but certainly these wages or I think also very valid point about paid sick leave would be matters of federal and provincial, but certainly perhaps advocacy on the part of this group might be the avenue that we pursue.
Sean.
Thank you, Brian. Craig, two comments on the business support program objectives. I think Tricia was bang on in suggesting that we have to think about an objective needs to be to stimulate demand, both locally and then regionally and eventually sort of pan-regionally in order to help the sectors involved, retail, restaurant, and tourism in particular, and of course the arts as well. So that's an agreement, and I think that needs to be an objective. Secondarily, I also think we need to protect an objective about balancing the short term and the long term. I know from the engagement we've had in our sector as recently as yesterday, we were very conscious of not sacrificing some of the long-term growth objectives for short-term survival initiatives. So I really do think we need to somehow reflect that and protect that as part of this working group and the recovery planning that you're doing. And I know that our sector, accommodation particularly, would be very supportive of that. It won't do us any good to save all the hotels, rooms, jobs, etc., if there's nothing to do down the road or no new opportunities like deep water docks and conference centers and those kinds of things. And the last thing, just while I have the microphone, as it relates to other options for consideration, please don't hesitate to reach out through me to the accommodation sector to participate specifically in any of those kinds of ideas and roundtable. We're very open to participating at a really grassroots level and getting your hands dirty. So please, Craig, feel free to contact me directly, and I can direct some resources from the accommodation sector to you.
Thank you for your comments, and certainly one comment that I would wholeheartedly agree, and we're working really hard on right now, is that balancing of short-term and long-term. So it's one of the discussions, as the group may be aware, we're in the process of developing an economic development strategy for the community in partnership with the city and Kingston Economic Development and with everybody in the community. Making sure that the short term doesn't become a complete obsession without considering that that we have to look in the long term in terms of our strategy is a balancing act that we're currently working on. But yeah, that message is well heard and appreciated.
Thank you.
Sean, if I can just ask one follow-up question. You made an offer to be able to take things to the accommodation sector as a whole. Is there anything you're hearing from that sector that provincial about other options that are being discussed elsewhere that you want to throw out on the radar for us?
Well, perhaps if we could defer that, I could give you kind of a full update of what we've been working on in context. That'd be okay. That
would be great. That would be super. Can I just come back to Abba's point about messaging? So under other options to consider, is there any other feedback or ideas that the group can offer, whether it's myself, city, public health, if we're kind of working in tandem with them on messaging? What are the key things that we want to make sure that we're including in that messaging? I'd really like to hear from the group on that. Tricia?
I think attracting external investment through the province and the federal government is really important. And I mentioned the last time to develop shovel-ready projects so that we're actually importing external investment that's going to create employment.
Your Worship, maybe just with regards to that comment, I'd be interested in some insight. So one of the challenges I think we have is that government is often uses the same tools uses the same tools for different purposes. And the last recession, certainly support of infrastructure projects was very effective in stimulating the construction sector and manufacturing sector. I'm wondering how are you seeing different programs suggested for investment from other levels of government to actually stimulate the hospitality, tourism, and the arts sector? Is there anything in the arts sector that you've seen in terms of government investment?
There's $500 million dedicated to the arts and culture sector across Canada by the federal government.
So is that strictly for capital projects, or is it for actually operations and programming?
Operations and capital.
Okay, great. So,
Allison.
In terms of messaging and communication, one of the things that we're hearing a lot from our partners on the tourism side is confusion around, whether it's okay to invite tourists to visit Kingston at this time, or a lot of them are, coming to retail stores, especially in the downtown core, and how to interact with them, how to respond to them. And of course, there isn't a lot of clarity from the provincial level. There's not a directive to, not be able to travel between municipalities. But there is more broader messaging about limiting non-essential travel, staying home. I know from a Tourism Kingston perspective, we've consulted public health quite often about this, and certainly they align with the messaging of staying within the region, that's the safest thing we can do right now. So on our side, we've just been trying to kind of pull together information that our partners can use. So we've updated our COVID-19 page just to make it a little clearer for visitors who might be thinking about visiting what is and is not open, and also to communicate that Ontario is still under a state of emergency, and that limits how retailers, restaurants, et cetera, can operate. So that is a point of confusion that I think will continue as we move into the summer.
That's good feedback, Allison. Sean.
Just on that, here's a bit of a mom and pop statement. Allison and Megan and the team at Tourism Kingston are well practiced and have won awards for marketing Kingston. And logically, people don't necessarily think about going to a health website or necessarily the city's website for information about what is open and what's available. So just a thought that I've been having about where is the repository for all of this information, and who is best equipped and suited to be that one-stop shop for information. And at the risk of catching Allison and Megan's ire, I do think that the best vehicle to do that is Tourism Kingston. Both for our local residents and citizens, but also for potential travelers. So I think we do need a repository and one place that we can all refer to that is communicating the right information, and that seems like a logical one to me.
Okay. No, thanks, Sean. I think what I'm hearing from the group though is that maybe this is me, connecting with public health. I know Azim's on the call, but basically having that clear message from public health about what is okay. I know that Dr. Moore makes a very clear distinction between travel between Belleville and Brockville, for example, versus travel to the GTA, as an example. So that's something that I can take back and connect with him on. So I think that kind of speaks to the piece on confidence. People are looking for those signals for confidence. Azim, did you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, just quickly. Thanks for having me. I think this is something that we're still we're working on. We're trying to find some direction from the province as well. We want to make sure that we're consistent across the province in the messaging we're giving. Our local messaging, as you guys have said, is that people who live within the KFLNA region should stay local. There's areas of low transmission of the virus, and those are they're much safer. And it's often a nuanced question that we're having to ask is, where did you go? What did you do while you were there? What measures did you take? Who were you with? And from a healthcare perspective, as we're advising our healthcare providers, that's an easier conversation to have versus one-on-one, because there's so many nuances that are involved. But as we get more direction from the province, we will be sure to be involving everyone here and providing that along.
Thank you. Alison, did you want to add something? Go ahead.
Just briefly, since we were talking about marketing a little bit, I just wanted to clarify that at this time, we are not marketing to tourists. So although we're Tourism Kingston, and obviously that's our mandate, we are focused on supporting the local community and marketing within our local community at this time.
Thank you. I'm hearing the point though on need for clarity for sure. Abba.
Sorry, I was just going to wrap it up to say, yeah, just
Sure.
clarity, just because, for example, one of the problems, if we look at DBIA, we have retail stores that are trying to open. The challenge is that there's inconsistencies because people don't know exactly when to open or when stores are opening, and it's kind of an individual basis. But the challenge for the consumer and for the retailer is that people are still fearful of coming downtown because the messaging is saying stay at home, even though you're local, even though we're trying to use the Kingston local and the love local to support local, people are still tentative and are not sure because the overarching messaging is stay home. So then the retailers who are trying to open have a problem that there isn't much traffic flow. And then, again, it just is a ripple effect. So then you can't really bring back staff. You can't really, ramp up your activities because the consumers aren't coming there because they're not sure what to do. So I think we really have to be on the same page as that, because it has a ripple effect of how we're going to get people back. And especially if the city is looking at closing streets with the whole momentum being that this is an anchor point so people can come whenever things open, we really have to start putting in that messaging beforehand that this is safe provided X, Y, and Z, and that you can do so. Otherwise, as everyone has mentioned, if we don't have the crowds, it doesn't matter if we're open, we're not going to have the business, right? So.
That's great feedback for sure. So note taken. Absolutely. We will work on that for sure. Great discussion, folks. Is there anything else on the city business support program document that was circulated? Any other feedback? Lanny.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So I just wanted to add to Abba's comments in regards to the messaging. So you might have noticed that we have a number of signs across the city and also on our website that used to, the messaging used to be stay at home, stay safe. We've changed it to shop local, stay safe. So we're gradually starting to change some of that messaging. Of course, we're working with public health through that process, but I think we're at a different stage in terms of the COVID-19 response, and we're trying to focus the messaging on shopping local.
If I could just jump in, I'd say fantastic. And how do we harmonize that message consistently? So, I mean, this is a great forum to do it in, but how do we get that message out that subtle change has happened and what that means for that change? I think consideration from this group needs to be made to how do we do that and how do we stay in sync with one another? So just a comment.
Absolutely, Sean. Pavna.
This is not related to economic recovery, but I just want to suggest we avoid stay home, stay safe, because we're seeing a very large increase in the number of domestic violence calls, and staying home is not what we want people to be forced into. It's just something that the shelters have told us that that message is kind of being is contrary to what they're experiencing.
Great comment, Pavna. Thank you for that. Excellent. Craig, while we have you on the hot seat with the City Business Support Program, maybe this is a good chance to transition to the next item, which is the Support SME Initiative, kind of on those same lines. So if you can introduce that to the group, that'd be great.
And thank you, Mayor Patterson. And I'm very grateful. I don't consider it a hot seat. The the comments have been excellent, and I've been taking feverish notes to make sure that we incorporate that as part of our go forward. As I referenced at the end of the briefing note, looking for innovative uses of technology is one of the sort of activities that is currently underway. I did provide sort of a brief report out on a new tool. It's not the cities, it's a group of Smith School of Business faculty and students that have created a tool called Support SME. The website supportsme.ca. Hopefully you had a chance to have a quick look at it. The tool is very impressive. Dr. Yuri Levin and Dr. Mikhail Nedik are professors of data analytics and with elements of computer science woven in. They've developed a site that allows for consumers to either purchase certificates, gift certificates is in the proper language, or to actually directly just give money, support organizations, small businesses in the community. The tool has various very rigorous security components in the back end to secure payments. It is really an attempt to, and again, in the business survey that we conducted with Kingston Economic Development, cash flow and liquidity was one of the highest challenges faced by small businesses, and continues to be a serious problem. This platform is I would say it's not dissimilar in intent to things like Groupon, which is well known, and other sort of platforms. I guess the advantage of this platform is that they're not taking any money from anybody. So there are no fees, there are no percentages. I know in the case of Groupon, when you sell a coupon or certificate, they take almost 50%. There's no fees with this. This is simply a matter, and with the payment processes, there's no 30 days or 60-day delay. The money is literally transferred from the person purchasing or supporting the business, and within 2 payment days, it's transferred into the bank account of the business. Again, this is just an example of our post-secondary education institutions and then the members of their organization stepping up to try and address the challenge that they see in our community and provide support. We did have this was delayed because we just had a presentation yesterday for the first time on sort of the live demo. There were some very good discussions about how we get businesses onboarded onto this. It's a fairly simple process, but again, how do we get the word out that this is a platform of opportunity for businesses? How do they, if they're not computer savvy, again, some of the mom and pop smaller organizations that perhaps aren't as computer savvy, how do we get them on board and operating? How do we make the public aware that this is an opportunity for them to support local? And one of the interesting comments, and again, it perhaps relates to providing a direct sort of gift, is how do we help use this platform for the not-for-profit sector? Many of those organizations are at the front lines and helping the city and our community address the pandemic, and how do we use this platform to provide resources to them? So there's lots of information. As I said, it's not my platform. It's just the city's been helped to facilitate sort of solutions and ideas and bring people together. And happy to answer questions as much as I can about the platform.
I think it's fantastic what's happening there, because what we're going to need to do in the long term is actually develop our expertise on multiple platforms, live and digital, and to help people develop that during this period is absolutely critical for the future and critical for stimulating demand in the long term and alternate delivery systems. I think that's great.
Hi, I think it's a great idea. And I think on my end, the only thing that I would want to find out more about is kind of how that would be upkept, because there was a similar thing that was done locally, Flex Deals, that's no longer there. And part of the challenge they had was twofold, that initially people may put up information, but it wasn't regularly updated. And so therefore you lost the user confidence in it, or they want to use it. And then also it has to be interactive and interesting enough that people will continue to use it. So just wondering kind of how they will facilitate that to ensure that things are constantly being updated and renewed, so that it both keeps the user's interest and also that it doesn't fall off the line and doesn't become a non-essential kind of another app that someone has.
Very good comment. Thank you.
Other comments, feedback on that program? Pavna, do you have any comments on just for the nonprofit sector? Do you think that this is a platform that would be of interest, that would be useful for nonprofits?
For some, maybe. A lot of nonprofits aren't actually taking cash, but or taking payment, right? It's mostly free. But there are a few where it might be applicable. So certainly I have a note to myself to contact Craig after.
That's great.
And I think, and Craig, you can correct me, but I think it's also, it could be a platform for donations as well. So not just for buying services, but if you wanted to donate using that as a platform. So I'm not sure, I know that there's been discussions about fundraising options. I'm not sure if you think there would be.
A lot of people are using Canada Helps, but again, if we can see this platform, maybe there's an option that we can certainly even help Craig with a survey to our nonprofits. It's great that we have this tool and we can look at the applicable uses. So certainly something that I will follow up. Thanks.
That'd be very valuable. I know when the site was being developed, it was very much focused on small business for good reason. I know as they sort of progressed, this notion of just being, instead of buying something from a not-for-profit, you're just literally just you're donating cash, given the important role that the not-for-profit sector is playing in the COVID response.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think even things like we've just introduced options like e-transfer. Even seniors are now getting comfortable with e-transfer, and we never had that option before. So just different ways that we can make it easy for people to give would really be useful. Thank you.
Great.
I think it's such an important point in terms of the direction of the city that we are developing the multi-platform highway for the future. And this is the time that we're investing in our expertise, but this is actually going to have a huge impact on the success and sustainability of the city.
Thanks, Tricia. If I could ask one follow-up question of the group, and this came up in the discussion around this platform. I've heard some feedback also on the Love Kingston, the Buy Local platform as well, that there are these community level initiatives we're trying to help businesses, but sometimes there's a challenge getting businesses to sign up or get them on the platform. And I'm just wondering if there's any feedback of the group about how, is there a lens that you can provide that would help us if we're offering these platforms to make it easier? Is it kind of like just going once and trying to get everybody on every platform all at one time? Is there something that you can offer from that perspective that I know that, you know, especially for small businesses, they're just so busy just trying to keep their business going that maybe it's hard for them to make that time, or just an awareness thing? Any comments or feedback you can offer to us on that?
I wonder if it's the impact, really making a case for the impact of buying local, because it's right now, even before COVID, it was more the feel good of shop local, buy local. But I wonder if the case for support needs to be stronger in terms of the impact of buying local.
That's a very good point. So the economic advantage of buying from your neighbor. Supporting their jobs. We did have a representative, we had Rob from the BIA on the call yesterday, who is going to facilitate access to some members, but if there's be reaching out to, I'd welcome.
Sorry, was your question, sorry, was your question, how would it be easier for business owners to access those things? I think, sorry, I'm just gonna wait for the fire truck. Downtown. Sorry about that. I think part of the challenge, as I said again, like knowing some of the people who have tried apps like this, is that it has to be very simple and user-friendly. Sometimes the backend becomes very complicated, and that becomes a challenge because then it becomes another task on a to-do list of things that business owners already have to do. So it has to be something that has to be very easy to set up. And I think it requires people to go to each business or have a place where people can come to you. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And then the backend has to be so simple that it becomes like second nature. Otherwise, it does not become useful because no one, if it's a hassle, then they're not going to do it because other things take precedent over it. So it really has to be a very simple, user-friendly platform that you can then maybe pass on to somebody else who already does your social media or the things like that. Otherwise, it would be something that will not be used by people, and then it wouldn't work.
Very good comments. I know in our discussions yesterday, the developers were asking for, they described them as guinea pigs, but were some volunteers to actually maybe go in, who people who aren't familiar with the site, and just give us some advice if they register their business, just to see how is it easy, where are the bottlenecks in terms of their perspective. Again, it's difficult sometimes when you have computer programmers. They're intuitive in how they understand how the software works, as opposed to somebody who's never seen something and maybe isn't as computer literate as a professional developer.
So would you be sending that so that people can try it, or is that?
Sure. If you're comfortable, I can connect you with. We're looking to sort of create a small focus group of actually businesses to give us feedback or give them feedback.
Okay, great, thanks.
Excellent, that's great. Bhavna, you had a comment?
I was just wondering, are we seeing more people shop local as a result of the campaign? I know it's a great campaign, looks great, but are we seeing more uptake as a result? Yes. Okay.
But Michelle's giving a thumbs up, so I guess that's a good sign. Absolutely, but I think that there's a network effect that the more businesses that join, the more valuable the platform becomes, and the more consumers are attracted to it, and that in turn attracts more business. So it's just kind of building up that critical mass, and so if we can get to that point, that would be. Okay.
Maybe just one final comment, Your Worship. I'll just throw out a teaser for the group. I'll have another report for the next meeting. The winners of the Mayor's Innovation Challenge, the students are working on an app called Rediscover Kingston, which uses augmented reality. We saw a demo earlier this week. Looks very exciting. It allows the user to point their phone at a building in Kingston, and it pulls up historical images of that building, as well as information about the business that is currently in that building. So again, we're looking to see how that app can be integrated into COVID response to sort of support those sort of self-guided tours, augmented reality tours of buildings that perhaps are no longer accessible, those who do have accessibility issues, and how we can provide them with an exciting experience. So we'll have something for the group at the next meeting, but I think it's looking very promising.
That's great. Thanks very much, Craig. Any other questions, comments, feedback on that piece? Okay, so we'll move on to our next piece, and just by way of background, one of the big themes that I heard from the group at our first meeting was, again, on the reopening piece, trying to understand what the new business models look like with public health guidelines in place. So whether it's for restaurants, personal services, nonprofits, cultural sector, trying to reimagine and understand what those things look like. So one of the, I guess, following from that discussion, we've had some conversations about maybe sector level discussion groups on just basically trying to work out some of those details. So Ian, do you want to make a few comments on where that's at?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So after the last call, what we decided it might be beneficial to this team is if we start some discussions in the background that are focused on sector specific subgroups, that we can gather some of that information and bring it to this team so that it can be kicked around the table. So I'll be looking to engage some of the other community business partners to help me with some of those discussions. We're looking at subgroups for restaurants, for personal services, for retail, for real estate, both commercial and residential, as well as professional services. We'll get some feedback from the not-for-profit sectors. I know there's a task force together already, but it's important that gets consolidated and brought in, as well as construction, manufacturing. There's some ongoing discussions there right now. as well as some in-home services. What we're looking at is some of the delivery services that are happening around town, as well as taxi services, just having those discussions so that we can bring the information. Going back to what Susan said earlier about how it takes time and patience, I think that if we're not having these discussions with our subgroups and bringing it back to this team, then we're not really satisfying the needs of the businesses. A lot of those questions are around when can we open, how do we open, what does it look like, who's being affected in which subgroups. So I'm starting to reach out to independent business owners across the city, east side, west side, downtown, as well as rural, to put together nice little subgroups so that we get a good perspective from everybody. And then we'll be able to gather that information, present it to everybody on this call, just so that we know what's happening up there. And if you have any suggestions at all, somebody that maybe we need to incorporate, I'll provide a list to this group of what the subgroups look like. So if there's something that's missing, by all means, I can put it together. I started reaching out to business owners to get their buy-in. We'll probably be meeting every couple of weeks, just a quick call. I don't want to inundate our business owners with more Zoom meetings and everything else, but it is important to have the discussions and have people being frank with us around things like employment. We're seeing trends where employees don't want to go back to work because they're still on CERB, and just figuring out how we can navigate around those things. And then obviously engagement, going back to Sean's comment with respect to accommodation partners and working with them as well to be part of this. So for some of my friends on the call, like Karen and Michelle, I'll probably be asking you to help me out with some of those subgroups, just to make sure that we're getting a good capture of businesses across the city. Yeah, that's sort of what I started working on the last few days and putting those teams together. So it's looking good. Response rate has been great from local businesses, how they want to be part of ambassadors, if you will, of their specific sectors so that they can get the messaging up the food chain and presented in front of everybody on this call.
I think you've made a really fantastic point, because I think it's our subgroups that are actually going to drive the success of this particular task force. And I've been in conversations with some members of the arts community, but I want to form a more formal group. And I'm going to be talking to the advisory committee for the city of Kingston. And I've already talked to Kingston Museums with a fantastic conversation with Jamie about culture-led regeneration. And to have that integrated strategy, not just for the arts, but within Kingston itself, because of our economic impact that we have on all the different industries. And I think if we can find the mechanism of gathering that information in each of our sectors and feeding it to the committee, we will be getting some really valuable information.
Are there any other comments, questions, thoughts around this? Anything that we should be thinking of as we're forming these groups, Pavna?
So Ian, maybe between the mayor and you, we can figure out how you want to connect with the social services recovery. We've kind of started work. We've got we've had our kind of brainstorming session, and we've identified 3 priorities that we're working on. So we've also broken into subgroups. So happy to maybe include you in share all the notes, and if you want to attend any meetings, you're welcome.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to duplicate efforts that are already happening or redirect discussions that are happening. So we'll connect to offline and sort of what's happening. And if that area has already been covered, then perfect, and we can just maybe get updates on a less regular basis. I just want to make sure we're missing any sectors in the business community.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll keep you in the loop. And also there could be things we're missing. We're by no means perfect. So there may be things that you spot that we should be thinking about that we've completely missed. So we'll start sending you the notes and the meeting invites, and then you can decide how you want to be involved. And I know the mayor and Amber are there as well. So, and Ruth from the city. So, yeah.
Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, no, I just, like I said before, I just asked that you'd consider having an employee perspective on some of these subcommittees. I think it's very important. But thanks.
Great comment, Dave. Absolutely. And again, this is partly to, I think this will assist public health as well. So know that public health has been inundated with individual businesses coming to them, asking these questions, trying to figure out what worked financially, and then what what will work for public health pieces. So I think that this will create a more efficient process. So having public health at the table for these, I think, will be helpful. Ian, do you want to jump in?
That's a great point. Actually, the one thing that I did want to say with respect to the subgroups, I've been talking to public health, and based on the feedback that we start gathering from the subgroups, public health has offered to start creating some sector-specific webinars that they can launch as we start looking at reopening to answer some of the questions from whether it's personal services or restaurants for food and beverage or hospitality. So I've been having those discussions already with public health, and they're fully on board with rolling out sector-specific sessions.
Yeah, we're planning a multi-pronged approach. There'll be some more documents coming out that businesses can refer to with some local information, guidance on where to find provincial or federal or other sector-specific information as well. We're trying to come up with a toolkit as well as those webinars and outreach. And we're happy to provide support to the community. I think, as you mentioned, when every business in town wants that support, it's much more difficult, and we unfortunately don't have the capacity to do that. We're working with organizations like this, with the BIA, with umbrella organizations, and then feeding things down to members. And it's really, the important thing is, where do I go to find the good information? Where do I go to find the stuff that's relevant, that's up to date, and that will guide me? And where do I keep going to check, because things keep changing? You know, probably from the beginning of this meeting to the end, there'll be some changes already in some of the guidance. So we're happy to provide a link or a way to access the correct resources to everybody.
Thank you. Abba.
Sorry, just looping back to the public, to the health and the resources. I think also, even with some of the guidelines, and so when you are rolling out kind of what you are doing and these packets and the information things, kind of putting what are guidelines and what are actual things that we need to do would be very useful. Because right now, for example, if you look at some of the documents, it's like clean your baseboard twice a day. No one's going to clean their baseboard twice a day, you know? So I think, like, even in these dockets, they're inundated with a lot of information that becomes very overwhelming. So I think there really has to be segmented into, like, have to do, suggested to do type thing, so that people aren't feeling like this is insurmountable.
Yeah, I think so. Within those documents, there is language, and it says you must do this. We recommend you do this. You should do this, and it's important to read the verb before. As a result, you know, one of the challenges with saying that this is mandatory, the rest isn't, is that people will then say, "I'll just do the mandatory stuff." But really, we do suggest that you clean those surfaces twice a day, and much of it is not directive but suggestive for the majority of it, and it's just finding that balance between, we don't want to subtly say you don't have to do things, is the challenge in how they're worded, and so that verb right before will help inform that.
I understand that, but I think, to my point, is that this is what you do. So your job is to write those things, and you do, and you pay attention to the language. I, as a business owner, then have to pass that along with a lot of other things, right? So I am not spending time, and I can certainly tell you, my staff isn't going to spend any time to decipher between recommended, suggested, whatever, you know? So I really do need, like, even if it's a table that does have that, it's just that the language and the way that it's presented is very overwhelming. And so I get that that's your job, but I think that in the translation, somebody has to be able to translate it to the layperson and change that language so that it fits my job, because then it doesn't make my job easy. So I get what you're saying, and I hear you, but I also feel that you have to hear this side of it and make it somewhat kind of accessible and user-friendly for the other side.
As we roll out our materials, I'll take that feedback back to the people developing them, and we'll do our best to ensure that it's presented in a way that's accessible.
Thank you, and I think that, you know, Abba's point is that's exactly the vision of these working groups. Is you've got people from the sector, you've got someone from public health, and we can just have that back and forth to come up with something that's clear and simple, not like documents with a whole bunch of different things that everybody's having to decipher on their own. So I absolutely, that's exactly the goal here. So hopefully we'll be able to put that together. So great feedback. Abba, thank you. Any other comments, suggestions, feedback on that piece? Great. Okay, thanks, folks. Now we'll go to number 6. So this was a discussion about nonprofits and businesses and supporting one another. Lanny.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yesterday I had the opportunity to be part of a conversation with the Chamber of Commerce. I think it was a very productive and positive discussion that we had. One question that came up from the group was about how not-for-profit sector could actually help and better support our local businesses. So obviously one of my answers was the shopping local, and the more that we can do that, we can hire local and buy local. That is very helpful. But I did mention to the group that I would bring this question today to see if there are any other ideas or feedback from this team.
Just a quick question, because non-for-profit's pretty broad. So speaking of the social services sector, I know a lot of them would love to shop local, but a lot of times like PPEs are not available. We try to get our hand sanitizers as much as we can locally, but I would also like to suggest that maybe there's a reverse as well. We know mental health is going to be a huge issue in the upcoming weeks, months. It's already started. And if there's a way we can put our minds together and anticipate what the volume is and how many workplaces or employees would access that kind of service, we can then start working the background on gearing up for what we know is coming up. Similarly, we know that the food bank estimates that right now a lot of people are using their savings to cover their basic food needs, but there's going to come a time when they'll be broke, and if previous disasters are any experience, they anticipate a huge need in the fall and winter. So how do we anticipate that need and get ready for it to help the community? Again, it works both ways.
So, Mr. Mayor, maybe I can add that on the call, there were a couple of non-for-profit organizations that do provide childcare and also typically would run summer camps, day camps. And I know we've been hearing about challenges of people getting back to work, not having any access to daycare or babysitting services anyways. So I think that was part of the thinking. Are there any ways that the non-for-profit sector that does provide, in some cases, those types of services, do we want them to look at, I guess, maybe a way that they could increase potentially, if possible, their capacity in terms of summer camps? As we anticipate, they will be running, or hopefully will be running later this summer, to help support people returning to work.
I wonder, once we're allowed to open public and private spaces, that there could be co-collaboration with the arts and cultural industry, with the restaurant and hotel and taxi services. So that's co-promotion of each other's services, because the arts are social. So that whole concept of dinner and a concert, but how can we work together so we're co-promoting each other?
That's good. That's a great suggestion, Tricia. Co-promotion. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments, feedback for Lanny or myself?
I do have a thought.
Yeah, Susan.
Yes. Lanny, I attended your meeting yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting to hear that comment about the shift that the services have depended on business for for funding and so on, and what can they do to support business. I think that is the key to our success in the future, is coming together as one community. One of the issues that I spoke to the mayor about when we initially talked about joining the committee was consumer confidence. And being part of the community is a big part of that, and making people feel welcome. And I think we can work with social services or the United Way to feel part of our facility, so that people feel they already have a link into the building. And I think it's a positive forward step when we get things back on track to work together. We have for years, but maybe with a little bit of a different approach. So I thought that was a really interesting part, and my brain has been sort of spinning about it since that meeting yesterday, to say that's an interesting change of position or adjustment of position that I think all of us could take advantage of. And I think that's sort of been the theme of what everybody is saying around this group, is that we need to work together to be successful, because we've found a mutual thing, which is COVID, that has brought us all together, and we don't want to lose that link.
That's great. Thanks, Susan. Pamela.
The timing is actually perfect, because right now there is some funding available, but we would need to move really quickly to, because there is a cost, and a lot of agencies are losing a lot of money, not revenue, not just from fundraising, but also from client fees like childcare and summer camps that Lanny mentioned. So the timing's perfect. We do have a subgroup working on shared spaces and what we're going to look for, because most of our nonprofits, Susan, are not geared for the kind of need and the space, physical distancing space that's required. We've also been in conversation with the federal government, who are looking at the option of repurposing federal buildings, and have asked us to provide input into what we need as a community. So certainly we can certainly start looking at this. I don't know what the best approach is. We do have a nonprofit group of volunteers working on social service, I should say, non-for-profit. But we would also need some business people to join us, so we can work together.
Great. Okay, so can we make that yeah, Tim, go ahead.
Just quickly on consumer confidence, in terms of testing for COVID and testing employees, is there any movement in that? I guess this would be for public health. It may create some more confidence that if consumers know that there is regular testing of employees in certain sectors, particularly sectors such as hospitality, which would be viewed as a little bit of a more risk when there's people preparing food, et cetera, and cannot social distance as much. So I'm wondering, I've heard this from other restaurant people that are wondering about getting their staff tested, and if that's part of a way forward to create some confidence.
The testing strategy, I mean, from our perspective, we're looking to the provincial government for the testing strategy. I must admit it's now under the purview of Ontario Health, who will be coming up with it. So it's a bit outside of our ballgame here at Public Health. There are challenges with mass testing of everybody. Just if we were to have that as our backbone, testing asymptomatic people, we would need to test everybody every 3 days in the province. And certainly there's not the capacity to do that. I think many of the other measures we're taking are really going to help. I know that I have confidence within our area that there's no ongoing transmission, that it's a safe area to be in. And all the other measures we're taking, like the physical distancing, like washing our hands regularly, wearing a mask if we're in areas that we can't physically distance, watching if we're sick, staying home. And most of all, it's the seriousness with which our community has taken this, that we haven't seen the spread of illness as a result of. So we know that as a community, we're all working together. We've already demonstrated how seriously we've taken this and what that's achieved. And I think that, to me, gives me more confidence than the testing. But again, I think it's partly a capacity thing. And I think Ontario Health is looking at the ways that they can provide that reassurance and who to best test and who to focus on to look for the illness in a surveillance capacity.
So maybe I think Tim on that point, you know, and Azim, I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying. I mean, there are conversations I've had with Kieran about how, you know, how we could look at that as long as it's narrow enough. So if we're not, you know, we're not testing everybody, but maybe we can look at some kind of narrow category of testing for front lines. So maybe we could have like a discussion on that and maybe bring something back to the group.
Yeah, and I think the province has already highlighted that as well. So it is included partly in that. But I'm sure in the coming days we'll see a more there'll be a better explanation of that testing policy coming out soon.
So Tim, leave that with us. We'll see what we can do there. I think that's
what I was referring to, is just the more high risk
exactly.
sort of employees, like kitchen staff or things like that. But also, I mean, and to Abba's point too, that we're doing this in a unified manner, and that the public's aware that businesses are taking steps. Like we're doing daily health questionnaires we're doing takeout and delivery right now. So we have a daily health test questionnaire, and various other protocols, of course, that we're following. And I realize that more and more information needs to trickle down from the province before real clarity is given, you know, especially to the restaurant sector. We still don't know what it's going to look like, but we're hearing already in the news today that Premier Ford's talking about patios, but we still don't know the capacity rules. We don't know a lot of what we're opening into. So as soon as that information is available and can be disseminated, it'll be very helpful.
Great feedback, Tim. And my other point is the great thing about having a local public health unit is that we can, I know that there's some stuff coming from the province, but you know, being able to have some of those discussions locally to see what we can figure out there. Abba?
Sorry, I have a kind of odd comment, so maybe just take it with a grain of salt and see. But I have also a question / suggestion. I think if we're also trying to like use these platforms that people can use, and we're trying to look at ways that non-for-profits can utilize their spaces, is it possible also to look for these cities, or maybe this is more for Lani, to implement kind of more hot spots? Because I think, like, for example, I volunteered youth diversion, and part of the challenge for us is that we can't meet to do some of our meetings, and therefore the challenge for the people who come in, who we usually serve, is that they don't have access to Wi-Fi, they don't have a place to kind of do these things, or they may want to partake in shopping and buying local, but then data, because cost is a matter. So is it possible too that we can kind of also, if we're developing all these online tools and we're trying to look at alternative spaces that people can do, whether it's for non-for-profit or for business, are we able as a city to provide free city Wi-Fi in more places so that more people can access some of these things? And because that's a barrier. I can't shop locally and use these things if I can't pay for the data, even though I want to, right? Or I can't go volunteer or go to my organization or even have a consultation session because I don't have a data package, and I know I can no longer go into the United Way building or the Boys and Girls building. So is there a way that we can improve some of the places where we have city Wi-Fi so it becomes more accessible, so we can break that barrier down, so then more people, and even people who may have been laid off or cut down, like, you know, they want to cut down on their phone bill, but they may still want to support. So then if they can get access to these areas, we can kind of generate more movement through these platforms. Just a thought that I'm just putting out there that maybe can kind of be considered somehow.
Lenny?
I actually, it's Craig here. I can actually comment, Your Worship, if you'd like. So this is actually something we're looking at right now. One of the things that we do offer is we do have the city sites that do have free Wi-Fi, and actually we just are about to add the airport that I oversee. So the airport is closed, but we've been able to, my technical understanding, been able to turn up the volume on the Wi-Fi signal so that you can actually access the free public Wi-Fi from a parking lot at the airport. But we're also in discussions with Utilities Kingston to figure out how we could offer some other sort of a Wi-Fi umbrella in a space that might be currently underserved that wouldn't have. And if you think of the service that was offered during the recent the Briar Patch was the offered free Wi-Fi to people visiting the tent. That was provided by Utilities Kingston, so they sort of are able to have as long as they have access to our fiber, could offer sort of a Wi-Fi umbrella. So we're looking to explore that. Where in the city is there an absence of that sort of free access, and how can we actually provide that in a cost-effective way?
Good suggestion, Ada. Thank you. Yeah, we'll look at that. Excellent. Great discussion, great feedback, folks. I've been taking notes furiously along with a number of other people on the call. So just watching our time at 10:38, I think there's a number of emerging issues, concerns, and ideas that have already kind of come up during the conversation. But I do want to open up the floor if there's anything else that's top of mind for you that we haven't yet had a chance to touch on or to mention. Anything at all that you think that we need to be working on that has not already been highlighted or mentioned. Anything that you want to flag for us, whether it's short-term versus long-term. John.
Thank you, Brian. I think I would be interested in the other sectors as well, but here's just a sort of a quick 30,000-foot overview of our sector. We believe that our road to recovery to get to pre-COVID levels looks like 24 to 36 months. And we're starting to get data from the CBREs of the world and other hospitality experts that would suggest that thinking on our part locally is fairly accurate. We're probably going to see a very uneven recovery. We may see some of our members in the limited service category recover much more quickly than our full service hotels. And that comes back to their dependence on large meetings, conferences, events, very specific business travel in order to be successful. So with that thinking, we've identified a number of what I would call key areas of focus. The first one being, how can we collaborate with the city and influence the province and potentially federal governments as well, but primarily the province around issues like property tax and municipal assessment and those kinds of things that will help possibly provide grants or relief that would also support the city and not leave the city short. We are reaching out to other hotel associations and other tourism municipalities, if I can say it that way, or municipalities that have a heavy reliance or a heavy importance. So the Niagara Falls is the Ottawas, the Torontos, the Muskoka regions, those kinds of folks. And so I'll be happy down the road to inform you of what we learn from those other regions. Secondarily, we're very concerned about the MAT. It is such a critical an important funding area for our sector and not just accommodation, but also tourism and the city as well. And so we really, I think, have to put some thought into, and we're interested in thinking about that as being a single source of revenue is probably showing a bit of limitation in a time like this. And really, I will put this in the context of how do we think about increasing our non-resident tax base, the contributions that visitors make. And it may be something that's applicable to this group or a working group down the road, but we're certainly thinking about, how do we fortify and solidify that in the future? We'd love to enter into conversation. Tricia said it, others have said it. How do we reimagine conferences and group events that will help out some of our members specifically? So how do we balance health and safety with crowd? I think that was a great way to say it, Tricia. And with that is on our mind as well, is how do we reimagine and begin perhaps to break some ground on things that are socially acceptable, that are acceptable from a health perspective, but also bring crowds safely to Kingston. We are concerned about employment and employment standards, and given the length that we're talking about, that 24 to 36 months, employment standards issues and maintaining employees and our employees' health and their mental health and social health is very important to us in the sector. General advocacy, if I can say it that way, and in particular, what has come up several times, and I appreciate it because I think it really does create common ground for us, is traveler and consumer confidence, and making sure that we're coordinating and collaborating and communicating effectively is something that our sector is exceptionally focused on and concerned about. Also concerned about financing, access to capital, debt, how those things particularly impact our sector. Concerns about recapitalization of some of our businesses if this persists. As long as we anticipate it doing, it could be very crippling for our sector. So as I said, we're working, our working group has met several times since our last meeting, and we'll continue to do that. And in particular, we're right now working on investigating what's happening in other regions and municipalities, looking for either support to work together as a group or looking for innovations and ideas that we could bring back to this group. So that's my short update.
That's great feedback, Sean. Lots of great stuff to focus on. So thank you for that update, and we'll keep working on that piece for sure. Tricia.
With the arts and culture sector, it's the gig economy, just like in the service sector, and so this, from an employment perspective, is the greatest concern of making sure that artists and arts workers are employed. And for that, we need more advanced notice on the rules around crowds, because we're a planning sector and there are a bunch of people that have 2021 seasons and don't know what to do because we don't have any information about the number of people that are allowed to gather and in what fashion. So the advanced notice on what can happen in the fall and the spring would be very, very helpful for us to create employment for artists and arts workers.
I will make that point with the provincial ministers tomorrow, the importance of planning. I will continue to raise it. Absolutely. I think it's critical. Great feedback. Anything else? Anything else, either from a city level or advocacy point? Yes, I see Abba and then Dave. Abba.
I just have a quick question. I know that there was an article and some people have been throwing out this concept of doing a COVID tax. And so I think that's something that also has to be addressed, like, that people are clear that this is not something that everyone is doing. It's not a provincially or mandated type of thing. And kind of maybe, I don't know how we reach out to businesses to have that discussion as to whether that's something. I mean, I guess we can't tell people what to do, but I know that there's a lot of negative feedback around people doing that. While I understand people have to spend more money as a business owner, I'm not sure that this is necessarily the right time to then pass that through to the consumer unless they're very transparent with it. So just being mindful that some people, when they start back, are doing that. And then how do we kind of have that broader discussion with our customers as well as fellow business owners as to what kind of, what it is that we're seeing with that. Sorry.
No, that's a tricky one. Do you have a sense, like in your sector, about how, or just broadly, Eva, about how common or uncommon that is?
I think it's I think I really can't speak to my sector so much because we're not open. But I do know I saw the CBC, and I think there was another article on it, and I think some of these spas were quoted as to whether they were going to do it or not. So I don't know if it's something that has been done, but because other provinces are doing it, it's kind of a preemptive. Maybe we will charge this type of a tax, and so I think it's just maybe if they are doing that, is it a consistent thing, and just making sure that if you're doing it on your own, that we stress to business owners that they do have to be upfront with their clients so that when they read the bill, they don't then think why this extra charge is
there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just jotted down some points when some questions and concerns when it comes to labor. I think we all agree that the economic recovery, when it comes to economic recovery, workers and community safety needs to be top priority in every decision that's made. Obviously, every business is a little bit different, and hazard mitigation won't be the same for every business. So, for example, if a restaurant is reopening, I think it's important to survey the workers in that restaurant, and not just owners, to ensure that the safety measures are put in place to make those workers feel comfortable when they do return to work. Sometimes workers will have a different perspective than owners or managers. Since the city of Kingston is essentially COVID-free, because of the great work that Dr. Moore and frontline workers have done over the last several months, I was wondering if there could be any thought put into how we could ensure that that people aren't traveling from other cities into Kingston and infecting workers here in Kingston. I know we did touch on that a little bit, but just wondering if there possibly could be any more thought put into that. If the province is considering reopening on a regional basis, has the city considered passing a motion that asks the province to prohibit travel from region to region? The city of Innisfil has apparently been turning away people from their town from parking at the beaches, and just wondering if there's any possibility of considering a motion that sets a bylaw for that here in Kingston. Kingston District Labor Council has conducted a survey over the last several weeks that has noticed some concerns with widespread issues in workplaces having insufficient access to personal protective equipment, particularly masks and other protective measures like plexiglass shields. I do appreciate all the hard work and thought that's been put into reopening the economy here in Kingston. I just ask if we could consider some of these points and set them as a high priority. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Great feedback. Certainly we'll take a couple of those things back. On the regional approach and what that will mean for travel, I think that that's exactly the sort of things that are being discussed at a provincial level. I don't see that something as the city that we would manage, because if it's a regional approach, it might very well be, GTA versus the rest of the province, or it might be all of Eastern Ontario versus other regions. So that's not something that the city would necessarily take lead on, but I know that the province has talked about it as being a key piece to be able to speak to, well, what are the travel guidelines or recommendations or rules around that. So I know that that's what other provinces have looked at. So I imagine that Ontario is probably going to have to grapple with that as well. So good feedback. Absolutely. Anything else to put on the radar? I realize that we've taken a good chunk of your time this morning. So I do want to say how much I appreciate not only everyone's time, but everyone's input and discussion. Really great feedback for us. I think we've got lots of stuff to work on at our end, and we'll continue to connect on the issues that have been raised. I think if it's 10:50 and there's no other issues or concerns to raise, maybe we'll call it a morning for now, and look forward to connecting again in 2 weeks' time at 9 o'clock. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Great discussion. Have a great day. Have a great couple of weeks. We'll see you soon.